custody battles, and the trauma of family drama. Kindra Reiber and Mick Smith pull back the curtain and explore stories that put the heart-wrenching puzzle pieces together with inspiring stories, notable experts, and actionable tips. Let the healing begin. Well, welcome once again. This is the Aftermath, and I would be Mick Smith, the Doctor of Digital, and we also have Kindra Reiber, our co-parenting mentor. So how are you today, Karen? Kindra, our co-parenting mentor. Yeah,
Is I messed you up because it's
yeah,
not legislative advocate,
I
right?
know
I
it's
just totally messed you up.
well, it's easy to mess me up, but how are you today?
I'm wonderful. I'm
Outside.
wonderful. So, yeah, the legislative thing, everybody's on a break, summer break, so not much going on with that. So I
Good.
thought today I'd change my title to the co-parenting mentor.
All right. Well, whatever works, it works for us. It works for me. But, I'm really excited about today's program because here we have the unprecedented third episode of Susan. And Susan has been with us twice before, two previous episodes. And due to popular demand, we have her back. So we really look forward to this session today. So, want to get started? Sound good?
Sounds wonderful. Yeah, when before Susan comes in, I know you can follow her on Instagram, but she had kind of a story of a lady's name was Kathleen, and she's a prosecutor in New York, was a prosecutor in New York, and she lost custody of her children, hadn't seen them in 3 years. And, from that, she also developed a chronic illness, cancer, and ended up committing suicide. So I think that's relevant for several reasons. And maybe she can speak to it just a bit more as we touch on it. But I know we've had several guests on before that talked about chronic illnesses and how
Mhm.
stress can build up to that. Not that we know if her cancer came from that or not. And secondly, she's a prosecutor, she's an attorney, and she still lost custody of her children through the alienation. So, as we dive in with Susan today, again, she is a divorce coach, TEDx, and motivational speaker, and parental alienation specialist. Let's welcome her.
Absolutely. Hey, Susan, welcome to the program. Thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure. Yes, always good to see you and talk with you. So, since we spoke last, you had mentioned something on your Instagram story about Kathleen. And do you want to go into that just a little bit more in detail?
This is a story that's very tragic that came across my feed when it happened. It was the end of May, beginning of June. I posted it right when the article came out in the New York Post. So it really made a story. And Kathleen was a prosecutor in New York. This was not my case. I didn't work with her, but I knew of the
Me.
case. And a prosecutor, I mean, guys, she knows the judicial system in New York. Right? I mean,
Right.
she's not akin to, and she's definitely not was definitely knowledgeable about how the system works.
Just,
And
yeah.
she prosecuted gang members,
Mm.
thieves, and criminals, and yet she couldn't navigate around family law. And her husband was clearly abusive to her and the children. She had video of it. It's all over TikTok. Maybe it's not now. I haven't kept up with it in the past 30 days. But he was all over TikTok yelling at the kids, screaming at them, calling her names. Your mother's horrible. Your mother's this. Horrible, horrible things. She was recovering from cancer surgery and she's like, I can't move because of my surgery. And he's still berating her. And the evidence could not have been more clear. Clearly, she knew how to navigate around yeah, custody evaluators. They had to be in custody evaluator, not guardian ad litem, whatever. The issue was she still lost custody. She
Mm.
still lost custody of these kids. And her cancer was resurfaced. It was deemed terminal and she didn't have the fight anymore. Just couldn't fight. So she flew to Switzerland where she could have or assisted suicide. And that's what she did. She committed suicide.
Mm. You know what? My heart goes out for those children that had an absolutely amazing mother. I'm sure she was amazing before the divorce, before the separation, and to not talk to her for 3 years and then, have her taken from their life. It's horrible. And it's one of the things that us who are going through the alienation, that is one of the worst things that, we can think of other than our kids getting hurt, right? And not being able to see them or being terminally ill and not being able to see them.
Well, I have a couple thoughts on that. And my first thought is the kids are going to have a tremendous amount of guilt about this. I she left them with an alienator, and now the sky's the limit of what he can do with these kids because
Yeah.
he's this guy. Alienators are abusive people. This is domestic violence. It's domestic abuse. It's child abuse. So the sky's the limit with him now. He's left his job. He's a patent attorney. My memory serves me correctly. Makes a lot of bank. He spent every penny he could. He said to her in writing, she had it, he will spend his last dime taking her to court. And I say this a lot to people. So I have a lot of high-end clients, high dollar clients, very posh environments. And they're like, well, my husband has $10 million. And I'm like, well, he's supposed to give you 500,000.
Yeah.
Spend 10 million, every penny he has, or she, it's not always the man,
Right.
and borrow money to do this. But this is not a one-stop shop. This isn't oops, I happen to, by accident, turn the kids against my ex. It doesn't work that way. It is very well orchestrated. The more money somebody has, the
Mhm.
better they can do it. This guy was a patent attorney. She's a prosecutor. Guys, we know who had more bang. She may be highly educated. I think she went to Columbia or Cornell or something. So she was Ivy educated. She knew her stuff. It doesn't matter. It's
Sure.
who's more money and who is willing to do this. And he was.
Yeah. It's so sad. So sad.
Tragic.
So I wanted to switch gears just a little bit. Susan, you are, parental alienation specialist and divorce coach, but this is a passion of yours. And so I think in our previous episodes, we might have talked about this a little bit, but can you start off by telling us a little bit about your personal experience, you know, with parental alienation and going through a divorce?
I went through a divorce, this high conflict. Divorce is over. Several years later, the ex came back to take one of the children, not both, one. I am very careful about what I say to protect my children's privacy because they are now adults and
Sure.
it's their story. They want to tell it they can. And because I have a lovely relationship, wonderful with both of them, I'm not going to do anything to sully that. However, I can say that I started out like every single other alienated parent starts out, and that is trying to deal with this rationally. This is an irrational scenario. There's nothing normal about it. And when you act normal, it's not going to go well. You have to have a strategy and recognize that no amount of wishing, hoping, praying, cajoling, coercing, begging that person to change, it is not going to happen. And then you have to get a strategy and you have to learn how to respond and not react. And that's a difference.
Mhm.
You also have to recognize that the child is entitled to both parents. Many times alienated parents feel as though they have to take that child from the horrible parent. They want to be the parent, but to the child is entitled to both parents. All an alienated parent should want is a relationship with the child because this is not about the parent, it's about the child. The child has the right to both parents.
Yep.
And one parent doesn't have the right to take their child's right away. It just comes down to it. That's simple. And yet it's a very complex scenario.
Along those lines, could you provide some examples of the tactics used by alienating parents as helpful to recognize what it is and how they can negatively influence children's behavior and attitudes towards the targeted parent?
Okay. I chuckled at that and I'm not laughing because it's not funny. The
Oh,
reason I chuckle is because the stories are endless. Amy J.L. Baker has her 17 ways that an alienator alienates, but they expand on each of these ways, how creative they can be. So oftentimes clients who are in a high conflict divorce who come to, because I'm a divorce coach. So they come to me initially, with, by the way, a lot of experience testifying in the courtroom because I was a PI for so long. And they'll say, well, how creative will they get? And I'm like, do you want to find out?
Knowledge the answer, but
um,
You
and
don't want to know.
right. The answer, and without being smug, the answer is we could sit here and go through 100 scenarios. They're creative and they'll figure out 101. But the truth is, they have a very flatline kind of behavior pattern. So it's pretty consistent. A lot of times when people reach out to me, they start telling me something and I go, and I'll say, well, when the next step is, and they go, oh no, they're already doing that. So there is a playbook that they have and they pretty much don't waver from it. But I think at the core of everything, they need to have the child, A, not trust the targeted parent and also be afraid of it. So it's not about don't go to your mom, she wears mom jeans. The child's not going to reject a parent for that. And they're not going to reject a parent because dad watches sports all the time. That may be the reasons when the child gives a ridiculous reason for not wanting to see you. But at the core, it's the fear and the mistrust. And it doesn't take long for the targeted parent to do that. It takes the studies, Linda Gottlieb's done them, and some other experts have done these clinical studies. How many times do you have to tell a child something before it becomes their truth? No more than three. No more than three. So the targeted parent consistently tell me, but my child knows I've always been there. They've always trusted me. I don't understand why how can they believe this? Very, very easily.
Right.
Now, once they start to believe it, it's even more challenging for them to no longer believe it. And I've seen studies done with children, actually on video, where they tell children, this has happened to you. And they go, no, it hasn't. And then they tell them the next day, this has happened. No, it hasn't. Then the third day, the child's like, you're right. And they believe it. They will actually tell a story why something happened. And then when you go to tell them it really didn't, they fight you on the issue. No, 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 it really did. So, and we've seen several studies and it's on video. Linda Gottlieb talks about them. There was a study done that was on years ago, like decades ago, on Primetime Live, where they, do children lie. Well, they can be coerced to lie. And with parental alienation, once the child no longer trusts the parent, the alienator doesn't have to do a thing anymore because the child does it all.
Sure. Sure. And to your point, I don't know if I brought this up on our last one, Mick, our last podcast, but I had to drive for business for about 5 or 6 hours and I was going through some podcasts and one popped up as recommended for me and it was a crime podcast and it was based on an alienating behavior. And it was a 10-year-old child that, again, was told to fear his father because he had sexually abused him. Didn't happen, didn't happen, didn't happen. But after he was told a couple times, right? It was proven in court for over several years that it didn't happen. I mean, the mother took him to court trying to prove that he had done this. But the child, to your point, started to believe it to the point that he feared him so bad at one of the visitations where dad was picking him up. He walked in the house and inside his book bag, he put mom's gun that was loaded and went and got in behind his dad in the car seat and shot him 5 times. 10 years old. It's crazy.
Now, and
He manipulated in his head.
that story wouldn't surprise me. I've heard things come out of kids' mouths that are stunning. I have a client now who has given me testimonials and has said, please tell my story. I won't give names or where they live out of, to protect their privacy. But she's been a client of mine for 2 years and now she has a very aggressive form of breast cancer. And the dad is instructing the child to, punch her where she's had her surgery.
Oh,
And I've
God.
seen, and the child started calling this woman names when she's 10. The dad was instructing her to, fill up the bathroom tub, put your mom's clothes in it, and then pour bleach on it. And I would hear what would come out of this child's mouth, and it was stunning. The horrors. She would open up the windows and throw the mother's mail outside. And the dad was provoking it. How do we know? Well, we see the text from the dad. Go in your mother's room and do this. And now the child is saying, this cancer should kill you. Dad and me and his family, we hope you die from this cancer. It has to eat you up. And it's getting worse, by the way, guys. I've been doing this a long time. The past 2 years, I am hearing things come out of children at younger ages, thanks to TikTok, but I won't go there. say things that are absolutely horrifying that are coming out of children's mouths at 10, 8, 7 years old that we never even heard come out of teenagers. Teenagers, the 15, 16, 17-year-olds to say things, I'm just not going with mom. I'm not going with that. I can't stand her. She's a bitch. Excuse my language. But okay, it's bleep on it. But they would say those kind of things. And we're like, that's horrible. This has been ramped up and it's getting worse and it's getting younger, much younger. Just in the past 18 months, I've had 7 dads reach out to me where their 10-year-old or younger, because one is 9, the rest are 10, are saying things like, when I'm 13, mom can take me into a courthouse and then I don't have to see you. Judge is going to listen to me.
Oh my God.
What is that?
Right. How does he know that at that age, right?
Or alienated. I'm like, did you just hear that?
Right. A child does not know. Yeah. Yeah. They have to get it from somewhere, right? It's just, oh my gosh, it's so sad. So sad. And my heart breaks for that mother that is going through that and hearing all of that. And my heart breaks for her because it's so hard. We have unconditional love and we want to keep loving our children, but it is an emotional strain. And I know where she's at. I've gone through it, right? It's an emotional strain on us to keep putting ourselves in that situation every single time and unconditionally love our kids, but we will do anything for them.
And also, it's, you get attacked. You're being accused, in the law. And I was a private investigator for a very long time and testified thousands of hours. And, it's innocent until proven guilty, right? Not when you're an alienated or targeted parent. You are guilty, 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 no matter how much you try to defend yourself. And that's the other piece of it. The targeted parent is always with, no, can't you see? I can prove. I got this text. Don't you see this? Don't you? The school knows me. I've never done this. Or my therapist can tell you I'm fine. You know,
Yep.
yep. And all of that falls on deaf ears.
Yep.
You're on the defensive all the time.
All the time. That to me, I think is what makes people sick. I think it's the defensive, the always having to defend your soul, your spirit, who you are. You're not this devil incarnate and you're being, played out as you are. And who's doing it? Your child. And if your child's doing this to you, that's your executioner.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I, I'm going to get personal here for a minute, but we just did at work, we did a full-time, or in my full-time job, we did a personality test. And I asked if your personality could change as you got older or given circumstances, right? And because I've defended myself for 4 years and on the defensive, it was very interesting. So we went around the room and my coworkers were putting down what we each thought each other was, right? Personality wise. Even though I didn't identify as this personality, they thought I was devil's advocate, always digging into things, always defending, always looking for the whole picture, right? Because that's what I've had to do for
Right.
4 years. So it's really not my personality. I just had to do it.
Exactly. And what happens is that we become defensive in everything. Your landlord could say, "How are you having a nice day?" And you're like, "No, I didn't do anything." Like, where did that come from? How we said that you have a nice day. Yeah. I mean, just passing by and you walk into the bank to make a deposit. I'm not overdrawn. They're like, nobody said you were.
Right. Right. Yeah. We don't mean to, right? It just becomes part of who we are.
Right.
So
It's hard. It's very hard. But again, at the core of all this, the person who is your executioner is the child, because once the child doesn't trust you, once a child fears you, the alienator, they just sit back and eat cake, right? Because their job is done. And then they do I love this one. But I don't know why Jennifer doesn't want to go with her mom. We've talked about it all week. She knows her mom loves her. I don't know why. And the child's and they're filming it. They're filming the kids screaming, "I don't want to go. I hate her. She's going to kill me. She's going to poison me." I don't know why this is happening. Of course they know why it's happening. They prompted it all week, Yep. Up to this stage. And then also what happens, and some of your listeners are probably experiencing this, the kids do start to get sick. So the day there's a transfer, they're supposed to go to mom or dad's. They get up that morning before school. They have a stomach ache, headache, they vomit, they have whatever it is. And then the alienate parent can go see. Every time they have to go to their moms or they have to go to their dads, they get sick that day. Well,
Sure, because
there's
they're
a
emotional, either physical.
you don't know about the week before. We can tell you about the week before. So by the time the child wakes up on Friday, let's say Friday's transfer day, they're charged up. They're a train wreck because
Sure.
they were getting prompted things like, well, you go to your mom's on Friday. Don't forget you can't take your iPad. This is a new thing. I've watched the iPad and I stay here. And the kids are addicted to TikTok. They scroll 24/7, right? And the thought of leaving their iPad behind, they'd rather give up a hand. And so that's one of the lures, and how many clients do I have with that going on? 5, 6, 10 or more. Or they'll say things like, you know, your aunt is having a party on Saturday and they got a new doggo. It's the cutest puppy, the favorite, just the Labradoodle, the kind you like it. But your mom, and she's the worst. She wouldn't let you go. It's her time, something like that. And maybe next year we're still alive. We'll go to the party if it's night time. This kind of. So by the time the child gets with the parent, there's all hell to pay.
Yep.
Including, and I hear this often, maybe this has happened to you, Kindra, when you still seeing your children, and let's say you have them 1 week on with 1 week off, and I know some people have 2 till 3 and 2 and
Mhm.
5 or whatever, but we'll just say for example's sake, it's 1 week on, 1 week off. The first day or 2, that child's with you. Oh my gosh, it's horrible. It is just like it's in my house. I don't want to eat dinner tonight. Well, honey, I made your favorite. I don't want to eat it. They throw it across the room. The next morning they wake up, you're like, I made your favorite pancakes. They're like, I don't like pancakes. And they, throw it in the trash. After about a day or 2, they start to settle into, they recognize you're really not the monster you are. Things are good. Then they go with the other parent. And then while they're with that parent, they're not allowed to call you. They don't have to tell you about they failed the math test. They don't have to tell you they had strep throat. Then you see them the next week and that whole cycle begins again.
Yes. Yeah.
Since that's so common and that's the transfer is such an issue, are there some ways of handling that situation or some tactics that you could recommend to make the transfer smoother?
Well, the first thing that I do tell all parents is do not get into it, meaning an argument with the other parent, because then the child's just on the side and they're seeing all this back and forth.
Yeah.
So I usually say, and clients sometimes will say, yeah, but the mom or dad, they're calling your names too. And I'm like, well, when they do, you just go, okay, I gotta go now. And you walk into the house, and that takes, listen, you're going to bite through your tongue to do it. I get it. We've all had bloody teeth, but you have to do it because you don't want to engage. And, these kids, I said in my TEDx talk, and is all parental alienation I gave almost 4 years ago, is they're learning. Don't be shocked when they grow up and they have relationships, they date abusers, because they're being groomed for it. They don't see healthy conflict resolution. They see bully tactics. Parental alienation becomes generational. I have had many clients who will say, I'm being alienated from a child. My ex, their mother alienated him from his father or his mother. And you're not going to believe this, Susan. I'm like, wouldn't I? It's generational. And don't be surprised if you end up not seeing your grandchildren because your child marries somebody who alienates them.
You mentioned that your TEDx talk, and so going to that, back to that, can you expand a little bit more on what you mentioned in that, where the children who experience parental alienation may confuse love and hate, and you talk about ending up in an abusive relationship, just like you mentioned, right? So, how can you confuse love and hate? Why would they get confused with that?
Well, because oftentimes the target or the alienating parent will say, daddy and mommy got divorced and we still love each other. Or we love both parents are like, we love you more than anything in the world. But then why is the child being tugged like this?
Mm.
Then why is this happening?
That makes
Because there's
sense.
not a child who goes through this that likes this. I've talked to kids who are alienated and they're like, I just want this to stop.
Mhm.
I want this to stop. And
Mhm.
they're stuck. And they do get sick. They cut, they pick at their skin, which is excoriation, or they pull their hair, trichotillomania. Cutting, like I said, is big. Eating disorders. Now, do we see this in the general population? We do know that, Generation Z is anxiety riddled in general more than generations past when we don't know why because they're not fighting wars. But whatever, they have their own personal battles and they have to deal with social media. They get thrust into adult worlds faster than they need to be. But when they're in these situations, it's so challenging for them because they don't know what to do. They're really trapped. It's an awful place to put a child. It's
So talking about the long-term effects and what
Yeah.
can happen as an adult, right? If they don't get help. First, I guess my question is if the children don't recognize it, right? You've talked about some of those long-term effects, the cutting, things like that. But how do children recognize that they've even been alienated? What if they just think it it just is the way it is, right? Like I
Normal.
fear and they never reconnect with that parent.
unfortunately that is what an alienating parent is willing to do to their child. They're willing to ruin their life. I'm going to quote the late Dr. Stephen Miller, who really was an expert on parental alienation, a clinician. And I was so blessed to have met him and taken courses with him and been able to talk to him. And by the way, I did ask him once about the physical health of these children. And he said, I can talk 8 hours on that. I think he probably took that 12.
Wow.
But yeah, I mean, we do see this, you know, and what he says, and I don't know because I'm not a clinician in this way, but he says that, and most of the clinicians have said that parent who alienates another child or a child from another parent has a borderline personality. They may be one of the clusters. They may have narcissism, narcissistic borderline personality. I know people throw around the word narcissist around, but seriously, borderline or antisocial, one of those. And why? Because I'm going to quote Dr. Miller, no normal person does this. They don't do this to their kids. But somebody with a borderline personality in general, let's take the alienation out of the equation. They live in the moment. They want what they want now. And however that impacts anybody else is irrelevant. And it's not because they're cruel and they're mean and they're demonic. It's just that's how they roll. That's their personality. So they don't look in the law in the future. We as normal parents say, with every move we make, Kindra, I'm sure you're the same way. Oh my goodness, if I take away this toy, how will this impact them the rest of their lives? If I make them eat broccoli, will they hate me when they're 35? So we're so attuned to this, we're so uh, y- uh, um, we're so careful to tiptoe around anything that could possibly hurt them in the long range. This is not it with the alienator. They want what they want in the moment. That's to hurt you, keep the child away from you. They get a lot of satisfaction out of it, i.e., narcissistic supply. End of story, morning glory. So, talking to them and saying to them, do you realize what you're doing to your child is a waste of your breath because they don't care. They will tell the world they love their child more than anything in the world. They'll cry crocodile tears. But the writing is on the wall. Murderer could say, I really didn't do it, but they got the smoking gun in their hand. The dead body's on the floor, and they identify the bullet to the gun. The bottom line is we know we did it. So it doesn't really matter what they say. It's what they do. And so the long range, in answer to your question, is some people get it. I've talked to over 326 adults who were once alienated kids, and they range in ages 22 to 66. They're from all over the world. I did not solicit any of them. I've either received letters or, interesting enough, I'll do a podcast like this and then let them offline. One of the, interviewers or a show or whatever will say, by the way, I was alienated or this is happening to my brother or my sister. It's that common. People don't want to talk about it because why? Because no matter what you say, somebody may walk away and say, they must have done something. Their kid can't hate them for no reason. They had to do something. So there's a little shame factor involved with that. Uh,
Yes.
but, but here's what I got from because I asked, Every single person who's reached out to me will tell me they were actually afraid of the alienator. The person they're aligned with is who they're actually afraid of. Why? You're afraid of them. A lot of times my clients look up, why my child just doesn't tell my ex to just, I go, you're scared to death of your ex. What do you want an 8-year-old to do, right? So they were afraid either that person had more money, more power, or assumed power, perceived power. If they were the person that was going to pay for college, maybe this isn't the person to upset. If this is the person who has the real nice house, the pool, and let all your friends come over, and the other parent lives in an apartment, like who are you going to kiss up to? So it really is a little bit of an extortion arrangement. So the child often aligns with their captor, which is as Amy Baker calls it, a Stockholm syndrome. They're aligned with their captor. So in these 320 people from all over the world, one's in UK, one's in Australia, it's not like they're all in my backyard. They all say they've aligned with that person. Number two, and this is the heartbreaking part, they feel guilty for what they've done to the other parent because they are the accomplice. Let's not forget they're the accomplice. They're the one doing the crime. It's no different than you get in a car with somebody and they go, go into the bank and say, stick them up. You're doing it, but there was somebody behind the scenes who's not going to get in trouble. You're the one who's going to get arrested, like cuffed and read your Miranda rights and then maybe go to jail. Permanently go to jail for that crime. And then third, I will always ask them, what do I tell parents who are being alienated? And they say, tell them never give up. Now that's a scary proposition because you get outmoneyed. My clients don't come to me with a lot of bank. They come with a lot of bank deficit. Right? So they get outmoneyed. They get exhausted. We know how exhausting it is. They get sick and can't do it. So it's very hard for me to say to a parent, don't give up when they feel like they've exhausted everything, but don't think your child doesn't know it. And one other piece to this. Every year in April and May, I get inundated with emails. Like I don't even want to check my email. So because it's graduation time, right? And how many kids tell the targeted parent they better not show up to their graduation or else? And they want to so I'm going to give you universal piece of advice. Don't write to me because we're going to give it to you now. Freebie.
Good. Wonderful. Because I was going to ask. What do you do?
Here you go, guys. You go anyway. Who cares what an 18-year-old tells you to do? Some of them aren't even 18 yet. Go to the graduate, and they'll threaten you. If you come to my graduation, I'm going to make a scene. First of all, they're not because they're 17 and 18. The last thing they're going to do is make a scene in front of their friends. But I don't
Right. Right.
do it. That's number one. Number two, if they make a scene, it's on them. But you show her. Because one day they will be 25. One day they will be 30, 35. And you can't take that back. Because they'll bring that up. Okay. And you say, but I always wanted to see you. And I tried and you didn't even come to my graduation. Well, you told me not to. I was 18. You were 47. Why were you listening to me? So I always tell parents. So there you go, parents. When they tell you next year, do not come to graduation, show up and make sure they see you. Don't have to hold up a sign and start screaming, I love you and make your scene, but let them know that you're there.
When the post-adulthood or post-childhood, I guess you should say, I was curious going back to the TEDx talk that Kindra had mentioned, and I was fascinated by it. It's one of the best things I've ever seen. My daughter was about the age of the person that you were talking about in that TEDx talk, so it really, really hit home. I highly encourage everybody to go see it. But I'm really curious about this whole love-hate relationship and this understanding as they are adults and the forming of probably maybe not the strongest relationships in their adult life. So wonder if you could elaborate a little bit on that, the person who has been alienated as a child and their kind of relationships they have as an adult. What kind of things should they?
They're terrible because they and by the way, they usually end up in therapy because they've been drinking alcohol, not water. They've been abusing alcohol or drugs, or they have other anxiety behaviors. They can't maintain jobs. They're uncomfortable. And they're not quite sure. They don't put two and two together. Very rarely they go, well, I was alienated. Of course, why wouldn't I feel this way? They usually end up in therapy because they've had bad romantic relationships, one after another. They're serial daters. They find themselves in abusive relationships over and over. Well, this love-hate relationship is very common because what they see is a parent who claims to love them, but then teaches them to hate another parent. So they're being taught to hate. And some of the things, I mean, you think that little girl who's putting her mom's clothes in a tub of water and throwing bleach on it is going to be nice and make a great partner
Mm.
Right.
to her man?
And
I
that's
mean,
like,
she doesn't get away. What she got? What was she going to cut up his clothes? Like, what is she going to set him on fire? No, seriously. I mean, yeah. What is the go to for conflict resolution? It's that. And for women or men, they get into abusive relationships where they get beaten or mistreated or they get cheated on, and then the person's like, "Okay, I'm really sorry. You know, I love you." There you go. There you go. In a normal, healthy relationship, your partner does something to you, like beats you up. End of story, right? The normal person would go, "Well, he hit me once. We're done."
right.
Next day the moving van is at your house. It doesn't matter what that person would say to you. You're like, "You put your hands on me inappropriately. You blacked out my eye. You knocked out the tooth. I'm out. I'm done." But the child who goes through this, they get into these yo-yo relationships where they're very abused and their abuser talks them out of it. And they've learned, okay, well, he says he loves me. I know he beat me up, but he said he loves me. There's no real clear line between that. So that's typically where they land. And how do I know? Because some of these people called me and said, "I've been married 4 times. It's been awful, terrible relationships," because they weren't modeled. They didn't model healthy relationships.
They end up repeating the mistakes of what had happened in their own childhood, and they
Children learn what they live, not what we tell them. It's like it's very hard for parents to be. I saw this when my kids were in high school, and I was president of Greater Baltimore. We always had these events about misusing alcohol, and they had these groups that would come in and speak, and they would say to the parents, "You can't chug beers on weekends to get hammered, and have your children be designated drivers from the bar, and then wonder why they're drinking." Like, children learn what they live. They don't do what you tell them.
Yeah.
That's
Right. They're always
in
watching.
general, in healthy I mean, I know lots of healthy marriages and healthy families, and they're like, "Why are my kids doing that?" Well, because they're that age, they're individuated, but you throw them in an unhealthy situation, sky's the limit.
Yeah.
So how do you recommend, or what do you recommend for people to deal with that psychological and emotional toll of parental alienation, especially given the fact that they feel bullied already by the other person or by the legal system as well? So what can they do?
Oh, you want that in one sentence? One sentence answer.
20 seconds or
Oh, you
less.
got less than 5 words. It's not that easy. It really isn't. There's a lot of factors, and I'm going to try to answer that as easily as I can. It really depends on the age of the child, how long they've been alienated, the temperament of the child. There's ways to approach the child. When I work with people, I ask a lot of questions in our first time together because those are really important factors. How you talk to a 5-year-old, how you talk to a 12-year-old are very different. The other thing that happens is that sometimes a child becomes alienated at 10. Parent hasn't seen them in 2 years, and they're like, "My little boy." And I'm like, "Stop right there." You cannot call him your little boy anymore. For those of us who've raised sons, we know that, at 10, they're like, "Mommy, I love you." And they tell you everything when they're in school. And, they're like chatty. They get in the car and you pick them up at carpool and they tell you every fight that happened. And then they get to be about 12 or 13 and you say, "How was school today?" And you go,
So true.
"Anything happened today in school?" "No."
Yep.
Meanwhile, you got emails
Shrug the
that
shoulders.
higher drilling. And for the kinds of drama at school, they go, "No, no, they're not." "Do you have a test?" "I guess." So that happens normally. But for when you're on the normal trajectory, you know that. But for parents who've been alienated and they get that, They can't tell the difference. Is that alienation or is it just being a 12-year-old boy? And the parent is still stuck with that child being 10. So I try to get the information about how old the child is, when they stop seeing the parent, or if they're still seeing them, what exactly has happened. So not to be obnoxious or not to evade the question, but it's very hard to answer that question in one sentence because there's a lot of factors that come into play with that. So can it be defined? Let's put it this way. If you're still talking to your child, I tell anybody who is starting to sniff out or feel that there's alienation, get help right away. You can reach out to me or you can reach out to, and there's people out there in the space. There's ways to talk to these children. There's ways to not talk to the other parent. Notice I say not talk to, not how to talk, but not talk. And there's a big difference. I talk about strategy. I'm very big on strategy. Let's take our emotions out of it. Let's get the strategy in place. Because remember, the person on the other end has a borderline personality disorder. They strategize to the 9th degree. They don't put empathy into it. They have no accountability, no remorse. So why are you coming from an emotional standpoint with them? Mistake, mistake, mistake. You have to be strategic, and there are strategies that do work. Now, if you're in the beginning of this and you have what I call the magical mystical thinking, where you're like, well, I just think they're being, I'm going to give this some time. Don't get proactive immediately, because parental alienation does not get better over time. Children do not grow out of this. Don't listen to your parents, your best friends, the mailman, the person in the store at the Whole Foods. Do not listen to anybody except somebody who really knows this space, because it doesn't go away. The kids don't grow out of it. They get more entrenched in it. And that becomes their story. They'll write the book on why you're a horrible parent, and they'll mean it. And so grab them as soon as you can. Don't let it get really deep and entrenched. And, it gets harder when they get older. When they're 16, 17, 18, 20, 21, it's harder. I'm not going to, I'm not saying that you can't reunite. You can, but it's a lot harder than a kid who's 5 or 6 or 7 or 8, where the courts will say visitation, custody is not an option for these kids when they get older. The what I call the scary space, like 10 from ages 10 to 14, really scary space. So if parents, anybody out there who's seeing this at 10, get help before the sun sets today, because it's not going to get better.
So, Susan, I want a couple things, if you can, when we have just a few minutes to wrap up, and I want you to come back to, you have a solution, I think, to get started right away, which is what you're kind of talking about, right? And to reach out to you, and you have a program.
Or anybody, you don't have to live out direct. Very direct. But I always say to people, you don't want to hear is what you need to know. And like, I know how this game plays, and there's no tiptoeing around it. You have to be really proactive. And if you do have counsel and counsel doesn't get it, we'll find counsel who does.
Perfect.
And
So let's end on a happy note here. Let's talk about a success story. Share a success story. Yes. So maybe that's how we wrap it up. Go back to your story and tell us how you reunited.
Well, my child has a great relationship with both parents. If you saw me around my ex, you'd go, you guys are the best of friends.
But that's okay. That's right?
Listen, my child has a right. Both of my children have a right to both parents. They're adults. I love both of my children. I'm sure my ex-husband loves the children in any capacity, whatever that is. The relationship that my children have with their parent, both parents, is between them and the parent. That's what alienators forget. The relationship between the alienator and you, former spouse, is a different relationship than the relationship between the parent and child. Alienator meshes that they have a problem with that. Like, they hate you, the child has to hate you too. So it's an enmeshment with that child, which is at the foundation of this, instead of saying, you know what, the child can love both of us. The other tragic piece about alienation, which broke my heart, was the division between my children. Because children who are alienated, if it's just one child, They don't see the other children. And right now, I have a nice case study, but I have two families that are twins, and the twins are divided. Real nice. I mean, that's really bad. Where a twin is with one parent and the other twin is with another parent, because twins, and these are identical twins, have a very special bond in life.
Yes.
They shared space in the womb. They were born at the same time. We know that twins sometimes have their own language, right? Between them. And to divide twins is really terrible. And all these twins are having health problems. They're all having emotional problems because, of course, two
Sure.
separate cases where twins are being divided and they're teenagers in both family situations. So
But it's
siblings,
possible.
are twins, but they're 2 years apart. And
But it's
that
possible to
relationship.
bring them back together. It is
Hmm?
possible. It is possible, and you've had successes. And
Yes, we're all going to the Royals game tonight. So
there you go.
can't wait.
I love you're
Yes.
over
And
excited.
ironically enough, my children are adults and they live 1 mile from each other. One is picking the other one up so that we all meet at the train station. Yeah.
Wonderful.
I mean, yes,
It
yeah.
can happen. It
It
can
can.
happen.
It can. There's just so many things that you can do that people don't realize that you can do.
Wonderful. Well, Susan, you have been absolutely fantastic. Mick, you
Absolutely.
have anything else to add?
No, I just thought it was fantastic. And I mentioned before about the TEDx talks. If you have not seen that TEDx talk, you must see that. I mean, I'm a guy, but it's got tears because it just hit so close to home. And it's one of the best things I've ever seen. And it just really hit home because I said my daughter was about the right age that you're actually addressing in that particular TEDx talk. So phenomenal, but always great advice, Susan. Really appreciate your time and really appreciate all your expertise. Got a lot of experience and really helpful. So I'm hopefully that people learned a lot as I did and will reach out to you as well.
Thank you
Yes.
so much. Have
And
a
your
great
contact
weekend,
information will be-
everybody. Have a great one. Take care.
Wonderful.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Susan. And we'll put everything, your contact information in the show notes so they will be able to reach out to you. But you can always get on your Instagram and follow Susan Shofer. And Shofer is spelled Shofer.
All right. Thanks, Susan.
Thanks,
Take care.
guys.
Well, that was phenomenal. So great. Then I thought it was really fantastic. This is unprecedented to have a person back, but she has definitely got a lot of good advice and good ideas for us to share and to learn from.
Yes. And if you are a parent out there that is noticing any signs of it, like she
Right
said,
away.
between ages 10 and 14,
Right
contact
away.
her right away.
Yeah. Well, that's it for this particular episode. If you enjoyed the show, which I hope you do, listen, like, subscribe, share it, and of course, especially say something nice to us about us on Apple Podcasts. That really helps to grow the show. So thanks a lot, and we'll see you next time. Till next time, Deus Volt.